Good evening and welcome to the proposed hunting regulations virtual public meeting. This meeting will include a live question and answer session with Game Management Section Assistant Chief Tina Johansson at the end. Submit your questions in this comment thread throughout the meeting to be addressed live at the end. However, please remember that all official comments or statements will need to be submitted in person through email or mail-in, despite when you view this virtual meeting. This meeting will be recorded and available to review here or on our YouTube channel tomorrow, April 11th. All official comments or statements must be received by 7 p.m. on April 30th. Information for submitting comments or statements is available on your screen. You can email gm.comments@dnr.ga.gov, or you can mail comments to the Georgia Department of Natural Resources, Wildlife Resources Division, Game Management Section, 2067 U.S. Highway 278, Social Circle, Georgia 30025. If you are having issues viewing the PowerPoint presentation, you can download a copy from our website at georgiawildlife.com/regulations/meetings.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you for attending our regulations comment meeting tonight. We have proposed a few changes to our hunting regulations for the next 2 seasons, and we've collected some comments. We'd like to share the proposals with you tonight, and at the end we'll do a question and answer, and we will take your comments as well. Diving right into the process of how we formulate our regulations, some of you may remember that we had a public meeting back in January. We did 6 in-person meetings and 1 virtual meeting like this one to solicit public input on any and all aspects of hunting regulations. We didn't narrow that down or limit that to anything that we had already proposed. We wanted to hear everything y'all had to say. So thank you to everyone who took the time to attend a meeting, to tune in online, or to send us emails with your thoughts and input. During the month of February, we developed proposals for actual changes that were presented to the DNR board in March. We briefed them on our proposals, which we then posted on our website, which Natalie told you how to get those and take a look at those. Hopefully you guys have had a chance to do that. And then during the month of April, we have a public comment period for 30 days. You all have until April 30th to submit your comments on these proposals. Those will be reviewed, and then the final versions of the proposals will be presented to the board in May at their meeting, which will be held downtown on May the 20th at the DNR headquarters. And they will vote to enact those regulation proposals. The ones that are approved will go into the popular guide that comes out in mid-July. So when we're setting these regulation proposals, what are the criteria we're looking at? Well, the number one filter it has to go through is whether it's biologically appropriate and scientifically sound. If a proposal comes forward that is going to do serious harm to the wildlife resource, we're not going to go any further with that. But most of the things that are in our hunting regulations are actually more social factors. Those are responsive to public desires relative to how we handle our hunting regulations. So if a proposal is not going to do long-term harm and a majority of hunters want to see something one way or another, we try to do that to the extent that we can, keeping in mind that we are trying to balance the desires of a myriad of hunters who use all kinds of different weapons, have different restrictions, and we do the best we can to provide as much opportunity for everyone as we can. That causes some degree of complexity to our rules and regulations, but we do try where we can to keep them simple and flexible. And then the final thing that we do take into consideration is we don't want to create challenges for folks who are new to hunting or to folks who maybe have additional challenges, whether it's time to get out in the field, maybe they have physical limitations. We try to take into consideration what impact a change would have on people's ability to participate regardless of their skill level or experience. So as I mentioned, we are in our 30-day public comment period. Unlike our January public meetings and input, this is actually required by the Administrative Procedure Act, which is a statute here in Georgia that dictates how regulatory agencies are required to make sure that the public has an opportunity to comment. We have 3 public hearings in person. We had one down in South Georgia Tuesday night. There are 2 more coming up in the next week and the week after. And then we also offer one virtual meeting because obviously we can't go to everyone's hometown. And so we want people to have an opportunity to ask us questions and hear us talk about the logic behind these proposals. And again, I want to emphasize you do have until April 30th to submit your comments. So without further ado, let me jump into some of the changes that are being proposed. One is that we're making the definition of youth consistent across species, seasons, and hunts. This was actually a change that was made by the legislature via House Bill 287, which amended the statute to stipulate that a youth is a person under 16 years of age. We did have some conflicts within statutes and among our regulations. Some said 16 and under, some said under 16. The original definition, which you can see on your screen, is in the Official Code of Georgia, Chapter 27-2-1, and it stipulates that a person who is required to have a license is someone who has attained 16 years of age. And so that's why we're making it consistent with that original licensing definition. Another change over which the department has limited ability to do anything are our waterfowl regulations. These are regulations that are set, the frameworks are set by the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, and they are reducing the early teal season to 9 days from the current 16. That season is based primarily on the population surveys that they do on the breeding grounds for blue-winged teal, which are about 10% below the long-term average right now. If you would like to see more about the population status of waterfowl according to the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, we do have a link to their annual population status report. The next proposed change I want to mention is that we are adding Calhoun County to the Southwest Georgia zone, where we have 2 weeks of archery buck-only season in the beginning of the fall, then extended the firearm season to January 15th as a hard date rather than the second Sunday like the rest of the state. And then the archery season has been extended through January 31st, which is the maximum statutory framework. I want to emphasize that this zone was created based on conception dates collected from deer in those counties. Calhoun County took the initiative and worked with someone to collect those data and demonstrate that there's a significant proportion of fawns that are dropped late, that are getting bred late. So there are biological data behind that decision. Sticking with deer changes, we have proposed an antlerless only 2-day firearms weekend, the first weekend of October. And most of the state, with the exception of the mountain counties, folks who hunt up there are familiar with some of those challenges, and then of course the archery-only counties in the metro Atlanta area. And the main intent behind this antlerless only weekend is to increase doe harvest in areas that need that, especially agricultural areas. It's obviously always up to the landowner or the lessees of a hunting club to decide how many does they want harvested. Certainly don't have to take advantage of that season. You can still archery hunt during that season. But we would like to see that increased harvest come at a time when our processors can take those deer because we do have some really awesome funding now from the Georgia General Assembly to pay for those venison donation programs. And so we really want people to take advantage of that if they can. Still sticking with deer, but quick delve into CWD. As most of you know, we did get our first CWD positive in Georgia earlier this year on a property that straddles the Berrien and Lanier County lines. In an effort to not make things any harder on our hunters than we absolutely have to, we have proposed a carcass disposal rule that basically says if you take a deer away from the property where you harvested it, it needs to go into a landfill. Whether that's you putting it there because you process it yourself, could be your taxidermist putting it there when they're done caping it out and getting what they need to mount your deer, or if it's a processor who is already required to comply with the Dead Animal Disposal Act. We don't want it to be a burden, but we don't want those carcass parts going to other parts of the state where they could potentially contaminate the deer herd there. And so this is the route we're going, rather than having onerous restrictions on taking carcasses out of a certain zone or what have you. Also related to CWD, if you do harvest a deer and it tests positive for CWD, we will not count that toward your bag limit. And we're doing this for a couple reasons. One, we obviously are relying on our hunters for our surveillance efforts. We need folks to submit deer for CWD sampling, particularly in those two counties that are currently affected, Berrien and Lanier. Also, there's no evidence that CWD can infect humans, but the CDC has recommended that people avoid consuming the meat from CWD-infected deer, and we want to support that recommendation, and we feel like offering folks the opportunity to replace their deer tag if that deer tests positive supports those efforts. Regarding our public lands, we do have one notable change relative to youth hunters. Rather than they just have to be within auditory distance of one another, that presents somewhat of a safety concern. But we do want to make it easy to comply. So basically we're saying that the adult has to remain in a position to take immediate control of the youth's firearm at all times when either of you is participating in a youth WMA hunt. Hunts have been adjusted on 50 WMAs. These are mostly calendar shifts or adding and removing quotas to improve quality or affect participation. And we've increased opportunity wherever possible. So for example, we've expanded archery opportunities on several WMAs, including Big Dukes, Big Hammock, Big Laser, Cedar Creek, Dye Lane, Dawson Forest, Dodge County PFA, Riverbend, and Rum Creek. Again, you can make comments via email or you can send a letter to our office. And of course, you are always invited to attend the May meeting of the DNR board in Atlanta. It's at 9 a.m. on May the 20th. That's when we'll be asking them to take action on these proposals. And with that, we will take a look at some questions. Thank you so much for your time and attention. Hello, got a question about the CWD test, and the answer to your question is we used both tests. So our initial screening test that we do for routine surveillance is the ELISA test. And then when we anytime we get a positive hit on the ELISA test, then that sample goes to the National Veterinary Sciences Laboratory in Ames, Iowa for confirmatory testing. They use IHC testing. And so that is the true positive. So if we get a preliminary positive, we wait to hear back from NVSL. And so both tests are actually used and were in this case used on the positive sample. A few other questions that have come up recently that I'd like to address. Some ones that we've gotten through email and whatnot. There's quite a bit of interest in hogs and coyotes because they do have some interesting impacts on our game species. Night hunting for them is legal on private land. There's no season or bag limit for hogs, feral hogs, and coyotes on private land. You do have the ability to use a light to hunt them at night, as well as thermal and night vision scopes. But the question comes up pretty regularly about night hunting on our wildlife management areas and other public lands. And there are some safety concerns there. We obviously don't want people shooting high-powered rifles, centerfire rifles at night on our public lands. We don't want any more disturbance at night than we necessarily have to have. We do have raccoon, possum, bobcat, and fox hunters operating at night, and they are allowed to take feral hogs and coyotes with methods and weapons and ammo that are lawful for use for small game. But we do have additional restrictions because those WMAs have a lot of other stuff going on. They serve a lot of other purposes, and we just can't open year-round hunting for 2 species that are not considered game species in Georgia. And that kind of goes into, we get asked about hunting year-round for hogs and for coyotes on our wildlife management areas. And again, we don't manage for those 2 species. We recognize that people enjoy hunting them, and certainly that's a legitimate pursuit for folks, but we would love to eradicate hogs wherever we can. And the most effective way to kill feral hogs, as most people who've suffered damage from them know, is through trapping. And we do a lot of trapping on wildlife management areas. Our staff, as soon as hunting seasons close, are out there pre-baiting and setting up traps. And having folks recreationally shooting at hogs can make them more wary. It can cause them to become fully nocturnal, to shift their use off the WMA and onto nearby private lands. These are not good things, and so we do limit the amount of hunting opportunity for feral hogs so that we can be more effective in our trapping efforts. Similarly, if you're really serious about trying to control coyotes, trapping is generally more effective, especially if you can trap during those times of year when you're most concerned about their impacts on nesting birds and other reproducing game animals. So we got a question about the data that we use to make our regulation change proposals, and some of those data are available online. If you look on our website under Hunter Resources, we also have harvest summaries. Our game check data are always available. It just depends on what the change is and what the data are. If you look online and you're looking for particular data and you're not seeing it, we have an abundance of ArcGIS data that are available, different maps, heat maps, and things like that. But if you still have questions, by all means reach out to us. You can always email gm.comments. You can call our office numbers and they will get you in touch with the person who has access to those data, and we are more than happy to share it with you or walk you through the logic or whatever it is you want to know, just ask. So as y'all know, we are smack in the middle of turkey season, and in a lot of different parts of the state, turkey populations have been in decline for quite some time. We did change our regulations, I guess it was 2 cycles ago now, to open the season a little later. We had hoped to open it statewide 2 weeks later, and that got amended. It is open a week later on average on private lands and 2 weeks on public lands. And the main impetus for this is to give those birds a chance to reproduce and the hens to start nesting before all of us hunters get out in the woods. Because just by being in the woods, as most of y'all know, just our presence is disturbance. It puts those birds on high alert. It causes them some level of stress. So our hope is that by giving them a chance to get as many hens as possible bred and get them on the nest where they're less likely to encounter hunters, they're hunkered down, that we can help with the reproductive side of things. We've also reduced the bag limit in an effort to keep more of those mature gobblers for the next year. We are doing quite a bit of research, and frankly, there's research being done on a cooperative level across the Southeast. We have figured out that when you're doing research on something like turkeys, what's happening in one area doesn't necessarily represent a larger area, like a whole state, much less the Southeast region. And so there are projects going on in most, if not all, of our southeastern partner states, and we're looking at some of the same things, but we're also looking at different aspects of breeding biology, habitat use, mortality, predator impacts. And the fact of the matter is that if it were something simple, if there was a silver bullet, we'd have found it by now. So we encourage people managing their own lands to tackle whatever they feel like is the the low hole in the bucket, whether it's brood habitat, whether it's nesting habitat, whether it's predators, whether it's quality of overall habitat. There's just a lot of factors going on, and I wish that we had sort of a magic answer, but the truth of the matter is that we don't. But we are doing a lot of research, and we are doing what we can to address the decline. Thank you for that question. It's a great one. So we've got a question about changing some of our WMA hunts that are currently bonus and or check-in hunts to sign-in hunts. And whenever possible, we do try to remove quotas because it's a limitation. Obviously, we want to maximize opportunity for as many people as we can. The other thing is the primary goal of some of our quota hunts, and definitely our bonus hunts are not as much about providing folks the opportunity for an extra tag. I mean, we have a 12 deer limit. It's more about getting data for management purposes. So we collect data at these check-in bonus deer hunts where we're getting breeding chronology information, body condition information, antler characteristics. We don't always need much data off of some of these WMAs, particularly some that we've been hunting for a long time and harvest levels have been stable. And so deciding whether or not to convert a hunt from one that we have to staff to one that is open for everybody to just sign in and come hunt is based on a myriad of factors. And we do look at that very closely because those staffed hunts are a lot of investment for us, and we want to make sure that we're using our resources wisely. So with regard to taking coyotes and feral hogs on our WMAs, they are considered incidental take. It is an open season, there's no closed season on them. So whenever there is an open season for a game species, as long as you're lawfully hunting for something that's in season, you may take coyotes and feral hogs. The exception to that would be WMAs that have the May coyote season, and on a lot of WMAs during that season, because we do allow centerfire rifles for coyotes during that time. You can also shoot hogs with centerfire rifles, but it's not explicitly laid out because it's open season. There's no closed season on those two animals. So we've got a question about testing deer on your property for chronic wasting disease. Obviously, folks are very interested in that. Unfortunately, there's not a live test for chronic wasting disease at this time. There's not a reliable approved test, I should say. In order to test a deer in the surveillance that we do, you have to kill the deer, you have to remove the lymph nodes from underneath the jaw, and those are the samples that get sent off for testing. And so we do a very strategic surveillance sampling in all the states in Georgia. And then, of course, we're going to try to ramp up sampling within those two counties. And then if you do harvest a deer on your property and you're interested in having that specific deer tested, we do have, through our licensing system, you can pay to have your deer tested the same way we test ours. Those samples get removed from the lymph nodes from the head, they get sent to a lab, and it goes through the same testing process as what we're doing for surveillance. And so we do strongly encourage that, but there's no live test. Right now, there's not a test that you can use for anything other than you have to have the head from that animal. So we got a question about some legislation that was put forward late in the session that would have extended deer season. And that particular proposal was part of House Bill 491. It was proposed, or I suppose there was a proposal to amend it to lengthen deer season 2 days before the end of the session, and that language was subsequently removed from the bill. So you will see that House Bill 491 did pass, but it did not have language to extend the deer season in it. And I think that's a good example of how our legislature does have control over hunting seasons and regulations. They're your elected officials, and it is their job to represent their citizens and their constituents, and they make the laws that DNR works within. So they set the framework, we make regulations within those frameworks. And so if you are concerned about an extension of deer season, I would recommend that you take a look at the General Assembly's website, find out who your representatives and your senators are, and reach out to those folks with your concerns. So one last question that I would like to address. We get this question regularly throughout the year and at our meetings and via email. Georgia has a pretty long deer season, and it's a pretty hot state. And as you move from north to south and east to west, our rut shifts around. And so right now, our season starts with archery the second Saturday in September. And then we have our primitive weapons week, which is also a youth only week. And then we go into our firearm season. And we regularly get very well thought out, detailed proposals from folks on how tweaks to those dates would benefit their area of the state or the weapon they choose to use or their particular goals for their deer herd. And we appreciate that very much. It gives us a really good view into how people feel about the structure of the deer season. But at the end of the day, it is simply impossible for us to create a deer season that is going to satisfy everyone. And the structure that we have is based on a fair amount of biological data and a whole lot of input from various stakeholders. Hunters, landowners, people who are trying to grow crops and trees, all of these things factor into our decision-making process. And to the extent that we can, we do try to maximize opportunity, but we can't really open the season much earlier. It's hot, but it's also fawning season, and so that's a consideration. And we can't go much later. One, it's in statute, but also the more we get into that late winter period, the more bucks have lost their antlers, and the more it impacts our small game seasons. We can't push our small game seasons any later than February because that impacts the population. And as I mentioned in the first slide, if something's going to hurt the population, we can't get on board with that. And so we are somewhat constrained by the environmental and biological factors out there in the field. And I say that not to say don't send us your suggestions. We want your suggestions, but I want you guys to understand where we're coming from and the limitations that we're working under in trying to provide as much opportunity for as many people as we possibly can. And with that said, I hope everybody gets a chance to get out this weekend, chase a turkey, catch a fish, watch some birds. Just get out there and enjoy it because it's going to be a beautiful weekend. Thank you and have a nice evening.